Okay. Okay.
Hi everyone, good afternoon to have you all of you here for the seminar today. I know it's a cricket season. I know it's starting with we are having a university festival in a day or two. But this seminar has been also in planning for a year. Let me give you a brief background of how it started. Bhaskar Roy, who's going to speak to us today, is a good friend of mine, and I have known him for 20 odd years already. And Bhaskar has been working in this field for a long time. And about 7 or 8 months ago, he posted something on AI, some certification course that he did, and asked him, would you like to speak to our students? And Bhaskar said he has never done a session with undergrad students. So how do we do that? So we raised this issue to the Students' Council. We created some questions and we passed it on to Bhaskar, and here we are today. So Bhaskar is a client partner and Bangalore Center head of Fractal Analytics. He's a seasoned AI and digital transformations leader, driving leverages the power of AI and cloud to help businesses innovate new products and services, improve their operations, and create sustainable impact. He also holds 2 patents covering predictive analytics and optimization solutions. Prior to Fractal, he has worked with organizations like Accenture, Target, and Genpact. He has an undergraduate degree in statistics from TU and a postgraduate in economics from JNU, where we actually met. I've just prepared a brief backgrounder to raise some of the questions to set the tone for what Bhaskar is going to talk to us. Now, we all know that AI has created a sort of excitement and amusement and some amount of fear in all of our minds. All of us are talking about it every now and then, right? One of the simplest concerns is what sort of impacts it will have on the future job markets, which is one of our central questions. And one of the simplest fear is reduce our jobs, right, for the students, but also for us teachers. Is it going to change the nature of universities in the future? Is it going to change the question, ideas about education itself? What does AI do to creativity if ChatGPT is going to write out poems and letters and create images out of 3 keywords? What sort of impact does it have? Does it have definitely good implications or bad? How does AI operate in the era of disinformation and propaganda, especially if we are not able to trace the origins of fake news and distorted images as well? To the extreme end of it, most of us have seen the program called Black Mirror, which projects a dystopian future based on technology, and we also try to understand well how knowledge, memories, and perceptions create politics of our era. So it is not only that our responsibilities and challenges are changing as students, teachers, and scholars. On the other hand, of course, we all know that there's a perception that none of this may happen, and social science will only become more urgent if more hectic and vibrant. After all, we need economists, psychologists, social scientists, political scientists in good times and bad times as well. In equal, we all are working in the fields of peace. Our concerns is perpetuate prosperity and create equality in our societies. But in future, perhaps our challenges will be different and societies will evolve faster. Given this background, I'm sure Bhaskar will have a lot more to add based on his experience as a practitioner, but also as a researcher and thinker on this field. So Bhaskar, all yours for the next 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll follow with the Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you for the kind words, Avinash. Hopefully, I'm audible and the screen also is visible that I'm putting on.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great. So as Avinash was kind of talking about the different aspects of what is happening today and how this session kind of came about being, it takes me back a few years, right? Because as we all think about it, AI in different shapes and forms has, of course, been there for quite some time. And what you see on the screen here, one, of course, deliberately I have put a very provocative title, because everywhere that you read these days, anybody that you talk to is talking about how AI is here to stay. It is going to take away jobs. And a country like ours, which has prided itself on the demographic dividend that comes along with being a growing population might not serve us the right way. Right, so that's one intent, but also you'll notice there are three pictures. One common thing across these three images that you see on the screen, of course, is they all relate to different shapes and forms of what people are talking about AI today. But the other common thread, and which kind of reinforces what people are talking about, is the fact that all three are machine-generated pictures. These are pictures that came up in mainstream magazines like The Economist, The Cosmopolitan, and others, but were completely generated by machines, given specific inputs by different kinds of people. And it is that latter part that I will try to maybe bring out a bit more as I talk about things today. With that, I'll get into the presentation. As Avinash said, I'm Bhaskar Roy, a practitioner in the AI space, but have a background in a combination of things, right? One, of course, statistics, as Avinash mentioned, which kind of helps me understand what the AI systems do today. But importantly, the grounding of having done my master's in economics from JNU helps me understand the human side and aspects of things a little better. So what I look to do today is, I'll maybe move to the next slide. 5 broad things that I'll cover. Last is the most important for me, which is questions, because I'm sure all of you as young adults have a lot going on in your mind and want to know more about. So that's my key part. But before we get there, 4 parts that I'll look to walk through. One, go a little deeper on why we are here, what brings us together today. Going into some specifics of what gets regarded as AI today and what it actually is. Should we be worried about what we are hearing and seeing in the world, and what we should do about it? Because sitting is not an option. We need to act, and we need to act now to do whatever needs to be done. Right? So on the first part, right, the kind of questions that Avinash was talking about, going from the mundane in terms of, for example, deep fakes that keep floating around or other usage of AI that we all see around us. The other part that is also very important, and it has been reinforced by different happenings over the last many years now, be it the election in which Mr. Trump came into power in the US, be the interactions or indiscretions that are done by different sovereign countries globally in digital arena for other countries that they might want to influence. Be it the players like Russia, China, or anybody else. Literally no country today can survive without having a clear digital strategy. But the common part that comes out, any newspaper that you pick up today, any magazine, even the biggest of thinkers are talking about how AI today is here to stay. It is taking away jobs. It is going to render anything and everything that we know today as useless. While that is a classic doomsday picture that most people thrive on, and that's how newspapers and magazines sell, but is that the right way of looking at it? But before we go there, why is it catching so much importance these days? So I'll take you back about 10 months. So 28th or 29th of November last year is when all of us, for the first time, potentially heard of this thing known as ChatGPT. There was a website link on which any of us could go and interact with this so-called AI system that was trained on all known information on the internet till a certain point of time. And all of us, I'm sure, in different shapes and forms have tried that out. We have tried asking it questions that are factual in nature, which we would previously probably have gone to Google to ask. We have probably gone to ChatGPT and asked it questions around a term paper that is coming up. Give me pointers on what I should potentially focus on, or other things. So essentially what something like ChatGPT did was give the so-called power of AI in the hands of everyone that is out there. What many of us didn't know was the systems were actually being trained and fine-tuned as each user was interacting with it. And of course, over time, there are multiple manifestations of that have come out in the world today. ChatGPT, of course, was made by a company called OpenAI, which is, for the lack of a better word, sponsored by Microsoft, a large tech giant. Google came out with its own variant, and then there are many others that are in the playing arena. Most of them are proprietary tools that are out there. And there are some open source ones as well, which are being promoted by different educational institutions. So if any of you have not tried, you should look at this AI tool called Koala, which is made by one of the research institutes in the US, completely open source, and lets you do a lot of things that some of the AI tools today let you do. But this all, as I said, is just about 10 months old. If you think about going a little bit further back, this picture right here is probably more relatable to anybody in my generation, and I know I'm dating myself here, but any guesses on who the gentleman on the left here is? Anybody might know. Anybody who's into quizzing or things like that would probably know, but still, maybe I'll take a 5-10 second pause to see if anybody knows. Yes, that's right. Garry Kasparov. For those who don't know, Garry Kasparov was the world chess champion in the late 80s, early 90s, the time when a lot of Russian grandmasters used to dominate the game. What you see on the right is a computer science graduate in the black suit sitting in front of a computer, which was called Deep Blue, made by IBM. And for the first time in history, a game that was based on thinking, game that was based on strategy, a computer beat the existing world champion. So and then this was early 90s, as I said, maybe 92, 93, when this played out. So this, in my mind, is the first time that I actually saw computers and systems being used to do tasks that humans typically excelled at. Right, so that's how far back, at least my memory goes. There are, of course, many systems, and again, there was a movie I think that came out a couple of years ago, which was around breaking codes during World War II, which is on the life of Alan Turing, who's known as the father of AI, so to say. That also kind of talks about how initially it was a lot of human effort that went in, and then of course systems got modeled on what was being done in those specific instances, right? And then, of course, from there to now, there are different applications of AI that have come into being. What you see on the screen are about 5 to 6 different ones. 2 related to what we saw for Garry Kasparov. One which is for a specific game called Go, which is very popular in Korea. Again, the number of permutations, combinations in the game of Go is significantly higher than what's there in chess. But even for Go, a system actually beat the world champion, who was Lee Sedol. This was about 5-6 years ago. Then there are other applications in which AI is being used today. Speech recognition, lip reading, identifying images. Now, identifying images for me is a peculiar thing. Because there are systems being developed today which actually enable a lot of individuals who might be disabled in different ways to actually lead normal lives by actually using AI. Or if you go to the bottom right of what you see on the screen, detection of diseases, in which the earlier you detect, the better it is actually being enhanced by the usage of AI as we look at it, as we know it. But even with all of these, and these seem a little out of the world as you start going a little deeper, these seem almost like superhuman in the effort that goes into making it, or doing what they do in terms of outcomes that they are able to drive and generate. But the one common theme, which many of us don't realize as we look at these AI systems, is they are very, very point-based in what they are trying to solve for. An AI system, for example, that is made to recognize images of a cycle cannot automatically start identifying who Bhaskar Roy is if I walk by. A system that is trained to detect, say, breast cancer cannot detect brain tumor without additional effort going into it. Now, some of those lines are getting blurred as we are seeing the likes of the ChatGPT coming in. But in the world of AI, what we call these systems essentially are very narrow deployments of what AI can do, right? And therefore, what's also important for all of us to understand is, as you think about AI, there are three distinct stages in which it is going to evolve. We are still at that first stage, and I don't know if the screen is visible. I will try to maybe expand that a little bit as we are speaking. So on the extreme left, what you see is where we are today in terms of usage of AI, which is known as artificial narrow intelligence. Essentially, pick up one area, use a machine to solve for that. And what you're essentially looking for is, how would a human solve for that problem? Figure out a way of having the system replicate what a human does. On from there, the next stage that AI will potentially go to is known as artificial general intelligence. This is where, with some programming, you can actually create generalized solutions and essentially have a state in which the machine essentially mimics or becomes as smart as a human decision maker in a lot of situations. But even in that, it will lack one key parameter, which is very peculiar to us humans, which is consciousness. Our mind doesn't always look at everything as ones and zeros and black and white. There are so many grays in the middle of all of that, and different shades of gray even within that. Machines are many years away from getting to that super intelligence level right now. Even the general intelligence is at least 5 to 10 years away, if not longer. So the point that I wanted to emphasize here is, yes, people are worried about what AI is doing. There are different applications coming up, but it is still very, very early days. We are still very far from situations which we frequently see in a lot of movies on sci-fi, where humans are fighting machines, or maybe even machines are fighting machines. So many, many years to go for that, while doomsday will eventually come, but there is time for us to act and make it right. So pictures like what you see here is going to become more and more common as we move forward from here. Now, there are two distinct things that you notice here. One, of course, as you look at different jobs that exist today, there are those jobs that are very, very repetitive in nature, which essentially are about executing against a process that has already been set and ensuring quality in that process as you go along through that repetitive execution. These are typically, for example, jobs that are on factory floors, people putting together, let's say, a car that you and me might be driving, or a two-wheeler that we are driving, or anything else that is getting manufactured. That is where a lot of automation already exists on the floor, and that is only going to go up. So that's one part of what AI is going to do in the job market. But more often than not, what will also happen, and this is where I'll go back to what I was mentioning earlier, more often than not, it is humans who are telling the machine what to do. It is in areas where the human plays a huge part that a lot of us, the kind of things that we do, and our friends and families actually play a part, right? So essentially, what I'm talking about is, AI systems do exist. They are here to stay. But what we need to do essentially is humanize the kind of systems that exist and what they do. And I'll take a quick example. And this is an example that I picked up, I believe, from The Economist. What they did was they actually, so there are multiple data sets today that AI systems learn from. And these data sets are in the form of, for example, information about you and me, like what the government collects for the census or the NSSO surveys or any others that are out there. But there are also large databases of photos and videos of human beings. So this researcher essentially picked up all the images that they had, and they started using the AI system to essentially start segregating or creating segments of population basis different cuts of the data. The first one that they looked at was skin color. They also looked at gender and other ways of looking at it. But the example that I'll talk about is about skin color. So that's the first part that they did, essentially create those segments. So if you look at the screen on the top left, let me see if I can make it bigger. Yeah. So what they did was they essentially classified all humans in those photos on a 6-point scale, going from the lightest skin color to the darkest, and different shades in the interim. And they started asking questions to that AI system. One of the questions, for example, that they asked was, as you look at all the data that's in front of you, can you help me categorize people basis the pay that they make? Or can you help me classify what job these people might be doing? And as you can see on the screen, the AI system, given that it was trained on existing data fed in basis what happens today at workplaces, what happens today in colleges, universities, and every sphere of life. That data essentially was telling the AI system two very disturbing things, as you see on your screen right now. First, the lighter your skin color, the higher paying your job will be. The menial jobs will have a disproportionate number of people who are darker in skin color. And the same analogy kind of played out as they looked at the data by, for example, gender or other cuts that they had available to them. Now, this, as you think about it, as you look at it, is very, very disturbing. Because primarily what it is doing is what we all know to be true. We might not admit always, but there are biases that play on in the human mind. There are biases that come into being because of how we have evolved through history, how certain parts of populations have been repressed, how others have gotten more opportunities. Now, this is very apparent to all of us as educated humans as we are looking at it. The system cannot in any shape or form distinguish that. It cannot make out what is happening is right or wrong. And that is where elements of culture actually play a very strong role. Now, culture, as you think about it, is essentially the environment that all of us grow in, where we have grown up, how we have grown up, what we've seen happening around us. As you think about the world, culture maps, of course, play a huge part. If you look at it, there are certain established patterns of culture that exist across countries. For example, if you're in the Americas, Americans are known as the most direct in terms of their communication style. Go over to Europe, the same feeling kind of translates over to people from Germany. But if you have an American and a German talking together, the dynamics completely changes, even though both cultures are known as very direct. Likewise, you go to the Far East, Japan has a specific culture. You come to India, we have a specific way in which we do things, even within the country, depending on whether you grew up in a large city or a small, you grew up in the north of India or the south or the east or west, or anywhere else. All of us are brought up in a very different way, which creates biases as we go along. Some of these biases get reinforced with time. There are others that get refined or start going away as well. So culture, along with biases, is a key part of human behavior that gets dramatically enhanced by what systems enabled by AI do. This, in my mind, is where education in liberal arts actually sets all of us apart and enables us to actually play a positive role in the development of systems that are going to define the human civilization in times to come. The critical elements of ensuring that whatever we do is ethical in nature, it is humane, it is the right thing to do, only comes from having a systematic education in that, which is what all of us, all of you in the room are going through and will eventually go deeper into if you want to. So that is one, which is the combination of biases and culture that kind of plays a role there. The other part that gets layered on top of that is, of course, different thinking systems that people talk about. At its most basic, people segregate the left and the right part of the brain, one more creative, the other more quantitative. There are systems that other thinkers talk about, be it Dan Kahneman or Richard Thaler or others, which talk more about fast thinking and slow thinking as ways in which the human mind processes. Now, the moment you layer these thinking systems on top of the biases and the culture that I spoke about, the possibilities of what the human mind can actually do get manifested very dramatically. And it is that combined power that is actually needed to make systems better. With that being said, coming to the key question that was put to me, right? So far, what I've done is essentially set the background of what is happening today and why it is important to have the background educationally that all of you come with. What is needed for us essentially is a combination of three things to succeed. I'll quickly talk through those points that are there on the screen right now. With AI systems becoming more and more prevalent, what they still need and what they still miss is the human element. It is the understanding that each of us as humans innately bring to the table. And those get manifested in three key skills that all of us should be working to develop and fine-tune as we go along in our lives as students and then eventually as professionals. Because these are three things that machines for the longest time possible will never be able to do. First and foremost is communication. Machines can, of course, talk to each other. They can create new languages. But end of the day, the problems that machines are trying to solve for are problems that are either created by humans or are being solved by humans. Therefore, it needs a human to even understand what the problem is. Which then links to the second point that I have here, which is on critical thinking. The key questions that I always tell anybody who works with me is always ask why you're doing something or what you're looking to achieve by implementing a certain system or creating a new system that you're working on. And question it till you are convinced on why it needs to be done. So that critical thinking angle is also something that no machine today or in the years to come will be able to do. We are still very, very far from that. And third, once you have an understanding of what you're trying to solve for, why you're trying to solve for, actually then going deeper and doing what is known as problem solving. Now, there are different ways in which problem solving can get done. And maybe some of you might have read about things like first principles problem solving, which is a key part essentially of breaking down larger problem sets into smaller ones that can be handled one at a time while ensuring that your solutions are not overlapping with each other. So problem solving at the end is a key part of what any of us needs to actually succeed in today's world. So just to re-emphasize, communications, understanding what the problem is, critical thinking, understanding why we should be solving for it and being convinced on it. And then third, problem solving. So essentially coming down to how you actually solve the problem once you've got those first two questions answered. And I'll wrap things up with this one quick quote by Ted Roosevelt, who was an ex-president of the US. In a sense, what it talks about is the worst thing that we can do in any given situation is not doing anything. We need to look at what is happening around us, ingest all that information that is coming to us, and do what is right and move forward. And going back to the previous slide, just re-emphasizing what is needed and what differentiates us humans from machines is these three key parts: communication, critical thinking, and problem solving. Now, as I did all of this, what I also came across was, again, some questions that Avinash had mentioned to me were around the field of education itself. While I don't have that on the slide here, but if any of you have not looked at it, you should look up Khan Academy, which is run by Sal Khan. Salman Khan is his official name, but I think after the car going on the footpath, he decided to keep it to Sal. Look at the videos that he's put out there on how AI is enabling him and his organization to reimagine how education happens in today's world, how we should begin to question the basic tenets of what education is and how it should get delivered. Some of that has already been questioned a lot of times. For example, the traditional model of education always was establish large centers of excellence, institutes of eminence that are having expertise in specific areas, get students there and have them learn what is happening. For the first time, that got questioned about 10 to 12 years ago when massive open online courses, or what is known as MOOCs, and again, that word probably also has become archaic now because everybody talks about Udemy or Coursera or any other ways in which online teaching happens today. That was the first time that basic essence of what education is and how it should get delivered was questioned. Moved online, a lot of people who didn't have access to education in a certain way could actually access content as and when they wanted at their own pace. Now, in today's world, AI is actually helping them transform even that and actually get to a stage or move towards a stage where each student in itself can be taught by a system that better understands where you are. So the first step typically becomes assessing the level of a student and start teaching them from there and become an interactive tutor that then delivers what teachers are doing today. And to be fair, in today's world, as you think about colleges that we go to, universities that we go to, class sizes, depending on what course you're taking, range from anywhere like 20, 25 people in a class to about 80 to 100 as well. While excellent teaching happens, all students don't benefit the same way through that style of teaching. So wherever you need to customize, that is where systems that Sal Khan and his team are developing are actually enabling that one-to-one tutoring using systems. That's one way in which I'm seeing that play out today. Second, and again, some of my favorite professors, I remember talking to them during my college days, their least favorite part of the job was twofold. One, setting question papers, and second, correcting question papers once they came back. And that is where, again, AI is playing a large part. You can actually feed the course material to AI systems. They can help you create the right kind of question paper in a much quicker time and help you revise that the right way year on year as your course material also evolves. And of course, correcting papers, depending on what you're doing, some of that could also potentially be done by AI. That's two parts in which AI is being looked at today from within the teaching field as well. So that's what I wanted to share today. And I've put here a few books as reference material that I looked at as I was thinking about this topic, right? Because AI or systems or robots, of course, have been there in books for a long time. Pick up any Isaac Asimov book. It talks about what future will be. But more importantly, it also, and again, I don't have that here, but you should look that up. There were 3 key rules for robots that were defined by Mr. Asimov in the 50s, which is essentially talk about what should define AI as we move forward. And the central theme there is no machine should ever do anything that is prejudicial to human beings. No machine should ever disobey an order given by a human. That's the key tenet under which ideally all AI development in the future should happen. So that's why you should look up the quotes from his book and of course read that if you've not read. The second kind of books that I looked at was by Erin Meyer. She writes a lot. In fact, these days, she's better known for writing biographies or co-authoring biographies with leading personalities in today's world. But you should look up this book called The Culture Map by her. Excellent way in which she kind of explains how cultures across countries translates and how you should think about decisioning and working with different kinds of people. Then, of course, Mr. Kahneman, Nobel laureate in economics, talks about thinking fast, thinking slow, and different kinds of noise in decision-making and behavioral sciences and all of that. And also, interestingly, right on the bottom corner, Friedrich Hayek. He was the first one who actually spoke about bringing in culture as a key element to any decision-making that happens. So all good books to kind of reference. If you have to pick maybe 2 or 3 of these, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, Culture Map, iRobot. Those 3 would be my go-to to start with. And of course, feel free to go deeper as you want. And then a quick link, I'll share this presentation also, a quick link on what Mr. Sahil Khan and his team are doing as a blog. And there are, of course, if you go on YouTube, there are videos in which he's delivering TED Talks and he's also kind of walking through the systems as they are looking at today. So yeah, so with that, I'll keep quiet now and welcome any questions that are there from the audience. Avinash, back to you.
Thank you, Bhaskar. This has been greatly informative, and you have raised some of the issues that actually led to the kind of this idea of having such a talk, especially for the students. We also have our Dean, Professor Kathleen, and a couple of my colleagues who actually work in economics, in the field of economics. So Professor Kathleen, would you like to make an intervention? Question of some sort?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
I'm a cultural anthropologist, so that's and thank you very much for this this lecture, really, which served as a starting point. You know, I think that it's really important to look at. I mean, we've examined it here, seeing, you know, what's the difference? What does the human mind add to something like literature? But, you know, we've got so many things that we can go into. Question, when you talked about culture, can I continue? Really interesting about the color and the job look. Okay. So also thinking about there's an educator who's head of the Harvard program, Howard Gardner, who had developed the idea of multi-college. And you know, as I was looking at the way there's a hierarchy, also a hierarchy of intelligence. only about 3 or 4
Sorry to come in. Avinash, the voice is coming in and going out. You might maybe want to just repeat the question once.
Yes, audio is up and down, is it?
Yeah, it is a little feeble and coming up and down.
Yeah, you want to
Yeah, and I'll just move quickly.
have a significant online attendance. If anyone online has a question, please raise your hand and we will enable the audio as you raise your hands. I believe you also have a chat enabled for the online attendees. You can put your questions in the chat. We have Bhaskar, you can see these questions in the chat as well. While the campaign comes up closer to the mic. So maybe you can take that question next. Everyone online, you can put your questions in the chat, questions, doubts, ideas as well for a discussion for the next few days.
Okay, I'll try and compress my questions. It's the idea of skin color and job. And also I would put in just to skin color, but the way that skin color, caste, and class are also given extra points in the system. So my point is referring to something that you can't take for its wholesale value. It's Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence. Actually, we favor certain intelligences. And are these other multiple intelligence? He names 9, some people name 15. You can't work with an exact number. Problem solving as you listed, and do they again respond to that has been sort of an elitist, like the problems that are stated, who are they serving? Do you understand my question? So is there a way in which we measure also AI, these multiple intelligences that exist in people to varying because of utilization of these intelligences?
So you got the question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I got the question. Essentially referring back to the point that I spoke about biases and how that plays into and gets amplified by AI. Now I'll try to answer that in a way and let me know if that kind of answers what you're looking for as well, Professor. What we try to do in that in cases like this, right? Because any sort of data that you think about today, data that is collected by different parties, be it educational institutions, governments, or anybody else, which is being leveraged or which is being used to essentially create systems and models that exist. Now, one key part of that, of course, is those biases are inherently already in the data. Because these are biases that play out depending on how we as humans behave and what we do. If we let the AI system play out, it will have those biases. It will, without maybe calling it out, start identifying those and perpetuating those in different ways. We saw the example of skin color. There is another example there of how companies like Amazon actually created an automated system for screening applicants. And what they realized about a month, 2 months in was that they were only getting applicants through the system, or a majority of them were white males. It was completely excluding all females or majority of females and specifically those who are darker in color or identify themselves as African Americans were completely being excluded. So it was there in the data. It was being amplified by the biggest way in which we can actually stop systems from doing that, first and foremost, of course, is recognizing that this is happening and then start addressing that at a data level. so that you essentially start removing any sort of identifiers that help the system then start making those connections between what somebody might be doing to where they come from. So it's at that level that ideally we should be addressing a lot of these questions. Like, for example, this gets played out in even the policy arena, where even if today, if you go to some rural areas of India, certain villages, even though the government claims otherwise, don't still have electricity, don't have some basic facilities. And you go deeper and you realize that these are villages that are predominantly either linguistically or religiously in a minority to the rest of the areas around them. So some of those things still play out, but the key part, and that is what I was trying to emphasize as I went through, was recognition of this happening is important. And that recognition can only come with a grounding in liberal arts and not the computer science, the statistics and the mathematics, because that is a very dispassionate or a very unemotional way of looking at situations and things that are happening. And second, of course, once you recognize that, then what should you do to actually plug those gaps that might exist in the system, or tune it in a way that it starts overcoming that bias and maybe start over-indexing on some things which are important as well to ensure equity in decision making that is required in the social sectors or even otherwise.
Bhaskar, that's an encouraging word for all of us in the School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. Thanks for saying that the second time as well. I mean, I should have mentioned it the first time you mentioned that as well. Adya online has raised a hand. Let's give her a chance. Adya, you are enabled. Please, is it enabled? Yeah, Adya, can you can start speaking now.
Adya, you might need to unmute yourself and then speak.
All right. One of the persons who had put a question in chat, Jayendra, is here. So, Jayendra, can you read it up? It's quite long, so I sent it. The question in the chat, Bhaskar, it's in the chat.
Yeah, I can. I'm just looking at the question right now.
That one, just another short.
Yeah, see, this is a very interesting question, and I'll maybe draw a parallel to this, Jayant. About 4 to 5 years ago, when AI systems became sophisticated enough, they started being used for what is today known as deep fakes, where essentially the system could help you model for a living human being, or even somebody who's not living anymore today. You could pick up snippets from their photographs, you could pick up snippets from their audio files, and create a working system that would replicate the voice and tone of what that person might talk like. And this was used in different shapes and forms. Even, for example, I think a couple of years ago, a purported video by Barack Obama, the ex-president of the US, came into being, where he was talking about talking almost a Trump kind of a language, which people could not relate with him. Now, these are ways in which systems have been put to not so right uses. But at the same time, what is also happening is now these systems that are being developed are enabling us to even identify what is right or wrong. For example, if you go to news.google.com, to anybody who's previously been to that site, you essentially had a quick listing of news that is relevant for the region where you're logging in from. It would categorize that by the kind of news that you typically read, and then go on to the typical sections that are there in any newspaper. But what happens now is, if you go down all the way to the bottom of that screen, it has a fake news identifier that has been put in there. Now, that fake news identifier essentially starts doing a couple of things, right? And again, maybe I'll go one level back. What kind of fake news typically impact people? What we are worried about typically is fake news that leads to panic among populations. Now, this panic could be, for example, if there is a news that there is a huge flood that is happening, let's say in Joshimath in Uttarakhand, when everything else looks normal there. What essentially is happening then is somebody is building on the previous news of flooding that might have happened at Joshimath and trying to spread panic for whatever ulterior purposes that might be there, or spread the news of somebody who might still be alive, but you spread the news of that person being dead, or certain attacks happening on minorities. Now, what those systems essentially do is they do two things. One is pick up on the news, pick up on the audio or video clues that are there along with that news, and essentially run through the entire known database on the internet today to see if this has happened before, or there is a reasonable similarity between images and videos being used for this instance to something that might have been posted earlier. Just that simple act actually helps you uncover a lot of the bad ways in which AI systems can actually help spread panic and things around that. So that's one. But that still doesn't answer the question that you had, which is, what are the guardrails that we should put so as to avoid any major catastrophes or problems through usage of these systems? Unfortunately, given how we are as humans and overall our interactions within civilizations, anybody who maybe let me take an analogy there also. For any lock that gets made, there is always a key that is made to unlock it. That's of course there, but there are always more people trying to figure out a way of breaking that lock without the key being used. Or fraudsters who are trying to take money from you, from your bank account and otherwise, are always one step ahead of those that are trying to stop it. That unfortunately is the reality that we have today and will potentially continue to play out. But the key part, and I'll refer back to what I was mentioning earlier, is how do we build in the right safeguards in the system itself? Now, that safeguard could be at a data level, as I was responding to the professor earlier, or these could be safeguards that you put in the system itself. For example, today in the US, even though credit models decide how much credit you can get at what rate, there are certain kinds of classifiers that you are forbidden from using. So it is the regulator that has essentially decided that you cannot use somebody's race, where they stay, and a few other parameters to decide how creditworthy they are. So that has been put in by the regulator. Likewise, there are regulations coming in now on usage of data. So recently, it was passed in the Indian Parliament as well, the data protection law that came into being. That also has some safeguards that they're putting in place on how and where people's data could be used, so that you then start, to a certain extent, limiting the misuse of data as well for different things that systems could do. So that, I know, directly doesn't answer the question that you had, Jayendra, but yeah, that's my best way of answering that.
So you had one more question to add there?
Yes. So I really like your point about graduates in these kind of areas for more holistic decision making. But like, as a person who already has a degree in liberal arts, who try to get into this workforce, I've noticed that it's quite saturated as well as dominated by the hard sciences, and the kind of gap we see in, say, in the environmental sector where hard sciences dominate the researchers, right? So that plays out a lot in this sector as well. And how are companies actually taking steps, or what are the simply asking what are the places where we as liberal arts people can go further? But do we need to just get a CS degree to get into these places? I really want to.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, right? And much more directly coming to what you were asking as well. One way, as you rightly said, is you could get a CS degree, but even outside of that, there are multiple different things that you could be doing. And even today, anybody who joins my team, most of those are folks who've either done a degree in CS or a quantitative field like statistics, mathematics, or their MBAs. The first thing that I always tell them is go back to the basics. You might know how to use a tool that is helping you solve the problem, but then the elements of critical thinking and problem solving still need to come into play. So you need to understand those basics. So that's my starting point always. Go and start looking at, for example, first principles problem solving. It is a concept that is independent of the educational background that you come from. Any sort of problem in life, at work, you can look at it from the first principles. Essentially start breaking it down into smaller bits that you can then start addressing. That's one starting point. Second, kind of building on the CS analogy that you were talking about, the other two key elements that you typically require to be able to work with AI systems. One is having a sense and understanding of what data is being used. Now, that data typically gets stored in some sort of a structured or semi-structured database. And there is a query that you then do to know more about that data, to understand what exactly is happening there. Which is where simple tools are already in place that help you query that data and get that information out. SQL, NoSQL, those are typical languages that people learn. And then there are, of course, languages that you use to model or create those algorithms that you're going to put in that system, which could be something like an R or a Python or something similar that gets leveraged by different organizations. So it's a combination of those three that typically helps you succeed if you're getting into the career with AI. That's one. But more importantly, it is the other aspects that are required, because just building a system is not enough. What you need to think about is how that system will get used, who will use the system, and ensuring that it kind of works with everything else that might exist. And that is where there is an emerging field, not so emerging today actually, but behavioral sciences actually plays a huge part there. And behavioral sciences is where, and that's where I brought in the whole Kahneman school of thinking, which then Richard Thaler has taken on much further after that. Behavioral scientists these days are a crucial part of any AI system building that happens. They are the ones who bring in design thinking as a key concept into the research that goes behind any system or development that you're doing. So that is another area which is very crucial, usually underlooked by everybody who's building those systems, but something that you should think about as you're looking at careers within the broader AI space.
Right. Let me invite Professor Avinash Godbole from JSGP, again a common friend of ours. He's attending online. He has a question to ask.
Uh, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Bhaskar. Wonderful, actually, talk. You raised a very important concern here. So, okay, in fact, as part of public policy school, individually, you raised many concerns about AI and its use and all, because it's already taking a data which is biased and already having lots of problems with it. So as a public policy, and it puts actually a greater challenge for public policy makers. So what in my position, it's very difficult to think about how to, regulate or what would be the structure of our short-term and long-term policies to tackle this kind of problems. Because if we talk about India, already job discrimination in job is there, already employment elasticity lower, expansion of manufacturing or formal sector is very low, and then all of a sudden emergence of AI puts actually greater challenge in the Indian job market, as well as discrimination associated with that. So in your opinion, what do you suggest a kind of, for public policies, implications for public policy? How do you formulate public policies for short run or even for long run to handle such issues which might arise in maybe near future?
Very, very interesting question, Avnil. And see, basis what I see around, and in fact, even last week, for example, I was at a conference where they were talking about another similar technology called quantum computing and how the government of India is kind of thinking about that. At a policy level, if I think of it, the first and foremost part is, of course, awareness. And that I feel even today, to a large extent, is not uniform. Awareness of what a system can do in terms of both good and bad. That is one. Second, on the bad aspects that it could do, how do you ensure that you minimize? Because you can't completely eliminate at a policy level what might be happening. Because from a policymaker's perspective, if I think of it, there are two potential ways in which they can go. They can go with full regulation on whatever new is coming up, in this case, AI. But at the same time, they need to weigh the benefits of what can happen. And I'll bring in one example. Although this example is not for India, but going back to the 1980s was when, for the first time, automated teller machines, ATMs that are very ubiquitous today, came into being for the first time in the US at a large scale. And the workforce in the US historically has been largely unionized. It, of course, has been there in manufacturing, but even banks and all that have large unions, like in India today. So when these machines started getting introduced, there were large-scale protests that were happening, being done by, of course, people who were called as bank tellers. And for most of us who've not been to a bank branch, a teller's job used to be of taking in money so that you can deposit money to your account, and giving money to people who have come to withdraw from their account. So essentially, the ATM was replacing the job of what a cash teller in the branch was doing, and they were up in arms naturally. Over time, there was greater acceptance of what the ATMs could do. But if you shift from the 1980s to where we are today, the number of ATMs, of course, has significantly increased in the US and all other countries. The number of people designated as tellers in bank branches in the US has grown 3 to 4 times. So what has changed? What has changed essentially is, with the coming of the system that was handling cash instead of the tellers were then trained on new things that they could start doing. Many of these tellers eventually then went on to become relationship managers for these banks and branches. So they were doing a lot more with the same people than was earlier possible. So they essentially looked at the system augmenting what human was doing and making the human much more productive and doing many more things that they were not doing earlier. So that's the other way of looking at it, Avnind, in my mind, is yes, you can regulate, but instead of that, how do I look at what is needed? And that is where I have a feeling that as a country, we are not thinking about it enough, because there is massive reskilling that is going to be required, not just to take the development of AI further or new systems further, but also thinking about new jobs that will get created by the coming of systems like these. So that is one place where I think policy makers should actually be playing a larger, more active role than they might be today. How systems can inform that, I don't have an answer there, but that's my thought process on that question.
Let me ask if anyone has a question here on the floor. Here,
The voice is not very clear if you're talking a bit further from the mic.
It should happen. It's Ritika, that big mic is working, so it's right there.
Okay. So currently, of what is known as AI girlfriends by people, and these are designed to have very humanistic features. Chats, but you can also have very allowed to sort of virtually feel that are instances in several countries where people have actually started marrying, actually providing them a legal status. And there are now questions that are arising about how. So, do you think this is something that's harmful or not? If yes, then how should we be tackling this issue?
Sure. Sorry, I didn't catch your name, but a very good question and observation on what's playing out around. I'll give you my take on that topic, right? AI and AI created systems as we think of it today are like the shiny object that people love to play with. They want to experiment with what is happening. They want to see how much they can push boundaries with what they are doing and how they are doing things. And that is where some of the occurrences like what you described of human-like things that AI is doing, people getting married to AI, AI systems being given an identity. A lot of that in my mind are purely gimmicks of what people are seeing and how they are doing things. In fact, if you go back a couple of years, I think it was early 2020 or maybe end of 2019, when Dubai or one of the other Emirates in the UAE essentially established for the first time an AI ministry. And one government recently also created essentially an AI bot and designated that as a minister in the cabinet of the government and all of that. These are essentially different happenings by which people are trying to bring the right attention to systems. That is one. But more often than not, these are gimmicks that people are playing with. So I would not give it too much importance right away. And the reason for that being, I'll go back to what I said, right? 3 stages of AI development: narrow, general, and going on to what is super intelligence. It is only at that super intelligence stage that machines can start having what all of us as humans innately have, which is consciousness of what's happening around, distinguishing between right or wrong by observing what's happening around us, and combining all of that to essentially drive what we do every day. So we are still very, very far from that. Till then, there will be many more ways in which people will play these gimmicks out and try to be in the limelight, for the lack of a better word.
Manan, please introduce yourself. Okay, Manan has put a question in the chat. Bhaskar,
I'll take a look quickly. Yeah.
Open it for everyone.
Yeah. So again, great question. And for those who can't see the question right now, essentially talking about how in countries like ours, which are very, very diverse, food, education, basic livelihood, still not a reality for a majority of the population. How do AI and machines essentially help make things better for people, and at the same time ensure that we are not getting over dependent on these systems, right? So I'll maybe take I'll answer the second question first. My mind kind of goes back to, and again, there is some behavioral thing at play there as well. I personally don't like Apple phones, iPhone, uh, even though it is touted as something that, yeah, so even though it's touted as something that is very easy to interact with, and it does a lot of things without you kind of having to do it. But for me, in my mind, it plays on the fact that I don't have control over what the machine is doing at times. I much rather prefer an Android phone that I can customize to what I need, and I can play around with it as much as I want to. Although I might not do it very often, I might do those changes in the system maybe once in a year. But that innate loss of control is something that I am not comfortable with, and therefore don't let systems around me define what I'm doing. But then the other part that comes in is how and where it can be useful. There are multiple systems that can do a lot of things, right? For example, and I'll take this example from my own workplace, right? And this is where, even though you've not mentioned here, but healthcare is one area where actually AI is dramatically transforming how and what gets done. And I'll take a couple of examples. One example is, think of a disease like tuberculosis, or think of what happens in the first moment when there is a major accident on the road. In both those instances, detection of very specific things without error is crucial. For tuberculosis, identifying it ahead of time and ensuring that you start your medicines almost has a 100% success rate. If you can do it on time and get the medicine started, the person will recover from TB. Likewise, for an accident victim, if you can quickly identify any sort of microbleeds that might be happening internally internally in their body, and get started with the right course of medication and treatment within that first hour, the golden hour of any accident victim, that is very crucial. In both of these cases, given how systems operate today, we have a severe lack of trained professionals who can do these things on the spot. So what ends up happening? Think of a village, let's say in Rajasthan, where there is a wide prevalence of TB. The government today actually sends across a mobile van which has a TB scanning machine. The machine goes there. There is one or two people who go along with it. They will take TB scans, essentially a chest X-ray, and some cuts of it, of different people, make a note of who the person is, their contact number, which village they might have come from. That machine then travels back all the way to Jaipur or Delhi. That is where somebody actually sits with that machine to understand whether a person has TB or not. By the time that machine's results can then go back to the individual who's impacted, there is typically a 2 to 3 week gap. And as with anything that happens in the rural area, then you're struggling to even trace the person who was actually impacted. What AI systems can do is essentially improve healthcare outcomes for people like these. Because you can actually install a piece of software now on that machine itself. The scan gets done. The machine gives the result then and there with almost 97 to 98% accuracy. And again, given that this is a healthcare outcome, even if I am wrongly predicting somebody to have something, I am actually okay because I am being overcautious. So the treatment can start and outcomes can change. Similarly, the instances in which humans and doctors who are perennially overworked miss microbleeds and scans that are taken for the brain, for example, after an accident, is huge. And many people end up losing their lives because those microbleeds were not detected on time, which then leads to what is known as brain edema and then eventual death. These are places where actually AI is changing people's lives. but then you need to use it the right way. And not just AI. I spoke earlier about behavioral sciences, for example. Now, behavioral sciences is changing a lot how hospitals operate today. Think of a simple machine like the MRI. And for those who have not seen a machine, it is like a cylinder. And people whose MRI scans are taken are essentially put on something like a stretcher, tied down, and put inside an MRI machine for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And in that time period, multiple scans of your brain are being taken to then go to a doctor to understand what is happening. But that process itself of how it is done is very traumatic. And that is where behavioral scientists, behavioral researchers have come in, and they are helping hospitals reimagine how that process should be done so that you make the process less traumatic for the patient. Now, these are ways in which AI and systems around it are actually helping make lives better. Can it be done in other areas? Of course, absolutely it can be. There are AI systems today that can help you predict weather patterns in any village in the rural area. There are systems that you can actually do soil testing then and there on the ground to then understand the right quantity of fertilizer that should go into developing the crop that you're trying to grow. So the applications are enormous. What we have to be careful about, as you rightly said, is not becoming over-dependent or excessively dependent on what those systems are doing.
Any last questions? We have time for maybe one question. Maybe, very quick. Okay, we'll combine these two questions. Introduce yourself and ask the quick question, please. Evening, Professor. Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I've been listening for a while. I wanted to ask this from a student's perspective. Given that us as students of liberal arts are focusing more on diversification rather than specialization, that already puts us at a comparative disadvantage as compared to those who are studying hard sciences or have been purely studying subjects. Now, in order to what strategies would you recommend for us to implement, given the fact that within 5 to 6 years, AI is going to completely change the type of requirement or job perspectives that us as students would require while we're going into the markets? How do we equip ourselves for this change, and how drastic do you think this will be, and how will this dependency on AI affect our capabilities and limit our capabilities? Nisha, would you like to add a question?
Finally, a student of liberal arts. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So my question was, because we're talking about governance and sort of the integration with AI. Polygon, for instance, has launched a lot of projects with the Indian government and with a lot of governments actually. And you mentioned in your talk that how there's a need to sort of neutralize or remove identifiers. For example, the issuance of caste certificates or gendered sort of policies. A lot of this has been sort of done in congregation with these AI technologies. So how do you see that? Especially because there is a case for entrenchment of these markers within the AI system setup. Also, just very recently, Polymer, I think the second biggest partnership with the Indian government was launched, where it's now land ownership is being sort of completely transferred into the system. So how do you see that as playing into these very social markers of how people identify themselves?
Sure, I'll try to answer both of those, right? Although slightly distinct questions. The first one, which was on how a liberal arts student today should think about the job market and what they should be doing. First and foremost, I would want to reassure you that diversification is not a bad thing. Unfortunately, too many of us focus and go a little too deep in our chosen fields, which is good, of course, but you don't always need a specialist to be solving for what you're trying to do. So having somebody on the table who can bring in that different perspective, which considers many more aspects than that specialist might be, is very crucial. That's one. Second, any job that exists today, be it influenced by AI or not, actually plays on one very crucial aspect beyond technical, and that aspect essentially is knowledge of the domain, right? So for example, let's say that I am trying to work for let's say a retail company or a bank and helping them develop some AI system. The understanding of how that industry operates, and more importantly, how that company operates within that industry, is very crucial to contextualize any solution that you're developing. So keeping that contextualization in mind and playing on that is where that diversity of the experiences that somebody like you brings to the table actually is very useful. And then second, of course, is the behavioral aspects that I was referencing earlier as well, which becomes very, very important. But then if you do want to get into the technical side of what is involved in AI systems and AI development, then that is where those three aspects that I spoke about, which is a combination of problem solving and critical thinking, the ability to understand and look at data through softwares that can help you do that, like an SQL kind of a language, and third is a language that you develop your system in, which is typically R or Python. Those are the two preferred ones, which a lot of people today in academia also leverage for parsing through the kind of data scale that you are handling. So I think those three things are important as you think about a career if you want to get into AI, beyond the ones on domain and behavioral aspects that I spoke about. So that is the first question. And second, which was more on the policy aspects and the impact biased data kind of play. Now, it of course depends a lot on how and what we are looking to do as makers of policy or people who are implementing policy on the ground. Now, if your policy needs to be, or policy implementation needs to be directed, then some of that bias actually is probably good in the system, because I want to then identify the right ways in which that policy implementation can have a positive impact. But to avoid that completely, if you want to make a system that's sustainable, that avoids that completely, I think the only way to probably do that is at a data level. Outside of that, it has to be some sort of regulation that either comes in from industry bodies or from the government that can enable some of that development to happen the right way.
Right. Thank you, Bhaskar. Thanks a lot for taking these questions and also answering in a detailed way. I'll now invite Aryan to give a vote of thanks on behalf of the university and the students as well.
Yeah, I can hear you, yes.
So on behalf of the entire student body at JSLH and GGU, I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to you for delivering an insightful and inspiring guest lecture. Your virtual lecture was both enlightening and thought-provoking, and I'm positive that it left an lasting impact on all of us. Your expertise, especially in the field of artificial intelligence, were truly remarkable, and we were captivated by your presentation. And it provided us with valuable insights into the evolving landscape of career opportunities in humanities, especially in an increasingly AI-driven world. Lecture not only broadened our horizons, but has also hopefully motivated many of us to explore the intersections of AI and humanities further. And the perspectives that you've offered have been invaluable, and we are truly grateful for the opportunity to learn from you. Once again, thank you so much, Mr. Bhaskar Roy, for your time, expertise, and inspiring lecture. We hope to have the privilege of welcoming you back to JSLH and JGU sometime in the future, hopefully this time in person. Your contribution left an indelible mark on the student body, and we are immensely thankful for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bhaskar, very much, and thank you.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to at least someday visiting the campus. Avinash has been trying to get me there for some time. I'll make sure I'll make it sometime this year.
Definitely, hopefully sooner. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And have a good day. We'll talk soon. Bye bye.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to every online participants as well. I hope. All right, everyone, enjoy your weekends as well. Bye bye. All right, guys, thank you.